everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Parvati. I'm an archivist at the archives at NCBS. On behalf of the campus and the archives, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for the Research Fellow Talks hosted by the archives. Many of you may already be familiar with the archives and our work. After all, we spam you in your inboxes. But for those joining for the first time, allow me to share a bit about what we do. The Archives Spiel. The Archives at NCBS is a public collecting center for the history of science in contemporary India. We house over 100,000 processed papers, photographs, equipments, recordings and more. If you have a moment, I invite you to visit us at the basement of the ELC, just around the corner from the lecture hall. This side. I'm a little bad at the directions, but you can come to me, I can take you to the archives. We'll be happy to give you a tour. You can also explore our collections online at archives.ncbs.res.in. While the core role of an archive is to preserve and conserve historically significant materials, we understand the potential for research on these materials. Hence, a research fellowship program, generously supported by the TNQ Technologies, was instituted at the archives to foster conversation with the researchers. The program is an opportunity for researchers, irrespective of their fields, to engage with the collections and develop their projects further, whether it's for graduate research, doctoral research or postdoctoral studies. So for anyone interested in the fellowship, we encourage you to keep an eye on our website for upcoming openings. So over the next 3 days, we are excited to present the first batch of research fellows who will share the work they have done at the archives over the past 3 months. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from one of our fellows, Nisha, who will present her research titled The Fall of a Florican. Nisha is a wildlife researcher with a focus on wildlife beyond protected areas in India. She holds a master's degree in wildlife biology and conservation from the NCBS and has conducted field studies on birds in regions like the Goas and the Nilgiris. Over to you, Nisha.
Am I audible? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today at the end of your work day. And before I get to the talk, I want to do a quick bit of housekeeping. So the talk will happen in 2 parts. At the end of the first part, I'll pause for questions for 5 minutes so that I can get a break. And then we'll continue for the rest of it, and we'll again have time for Q&A at the end. Another thing is, for a lot of the photos up here as well as text, you might see a number starting with MS at the bottom. So what this means is it's an identifier, and this material is present at the archives in NCBS, and you can look it up directly using this number. And I have, for other resources, mentioned the citations usually at the bottom for each slide. And let's start. The idea of this project started from the work done by Dr. Ravi Sankaran, who was an avid field ornithologist and has worked on some of India's most rarest birds, both on the mainland as well as the islands. And he not only did a lot of research, he also wrote a lot about it, and his collected materials are housed at the archives in NCBS. And among his earliest works, he was active in the Terai grasslands, and again, that's a landscape I deeply adore. But if I am being completely honest, what really drew me to this work was one particular bird, which is kind of an enigma in the birding community of West Bengal, where I am from, and it's a bird that resides in this landscape, and that is the Bengal Florican. The species has 2 subspecies, but for this talk, we'll focus on the nominate subspecies, which lives in India and the subcontinent in Nepal, and historically in Bangladesh. And over the past 3 months, I have had the opportunity to indulge in the history of the species, and I have put that story together for us all today, and it's a story that I'm calling The Fall of a Florican. From the name, you may guess that the bird isn't doing very well, and you would be right. It has been listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List for a while now. But that's not the only fall I would associate with this species, because one of the most well-known behavior of this bird is its courtship display, at the end of which it does something like this, where it falls back into the earth in a display dive. And this particular behavior has intrigued scientists, including Dr. Ravi Sankaran, throughout the centuries. And today we'll explore that resultant body of work, overall some themes in the first part. We will see the early published knowledge, the historical literature to figure out what was known about the species before Dr. Sankaran came into the picture. And next we'll go behind the scenes of Dr. Sankaran's research in the form of his unpublished notes that are present at the archives here. And then in the second part, we'll see what have we done with all of this knowledge we have of the species. And a last special treat, we will trace the origins of the first Bengal Florican that was recorded in publications. So let's start the story at the very beginning, which is when the German translation of Linnaeus's nature systems, known by its binomial name Systema Naturae, was published in 1776 by P.L.S. Müller, and this supplementary included the first scientific descriptions of many species not recorded before, which included one Charadrius bengalensis, and in the wise words of Google Translate, this becomes, in Bengal, there exists a plover that is shiny brown and black spotted above, its head, throat and tail are black, its cheeks are pale castaneous brown, its fatherland is Bengal, and the only bird that it can be is the Bengal Florican. It's mentioned next in John Latham's General Synopsis of Birds in 1783, but we don't get much extra information about this bird at this point. We know it inhabits Bengal, where it's called the church, but it's a pretty threadbare account mentioning only its plumage colorations, and it's an account that has been later criticized as a mere scientific shadow of a species. But this is not surprising, because by this point nobody in the West had a live or a stuffed specimen or even parts of a Bengal Florican, and there was only one pictorial account, which was a copy of a painting done by Edwards, and this is that painting done by George Edwards, who is often cited as the father of British ornithology. And then for the next 60 years, very little was written about this bird until this guy. Brian Houghton Hodgson seemed to really like this bird. The authors of his biography have said it was perhaps Hodgson's favorite bird, and his writing in 1847 is the first written account of habitat, diet and behavior of the Bengal Florican, and then it was followed by other accounts by Alan Octavian Hume, Eugene William Oates and Stuart Baker. If you look at the books I've cited at the bottom, 3 of them are books on game birds, and that's totally unsurprising because the Florican was a very popular game bird and was perhaps one of the reasons Hodgson loved it so much, because thrice in the first paragraph he mentions how tasty it is. And he also mentions that it was hunted both by British hunters with guns and by Indian royalty who used the baz. So baz is a falcon, in this case most likely a Shaheen falcon that was used to hunt Floricans. And thus a lot of the early accounts we have of this species are from the point of view of a hunter. And let's see what we do know. So the basics, this is what a male Bengal Florican looks like. There's a lot of black, it has a small crest, and the chest feathers that can be puffed out. The female looks very different. It's much more cryptic colored, it's more brown. It is a sexually dimorphic species in its coloration, but also the females are slightly larger than the males. Perhaps more importantly, she is a far heavier and more bulky bird. And the females were very often even up to 5 pounds, and already in their first year they would exceed 3.5 pounds, which is more than an adult male, which means more meat. And even though harder to find, that's why the females were more targeted for the plate, and that of course has consequences, as we'll eventually get to. Now to hunt the bird, where would you go to? Hodgson writes, the ideal, most exclusive habitat of the church is the low-lying, moist, rarely redeemed tract of level waste, extending outside Sal forest in the debauch of Ganges and Brahmaputra, which simply looks like this. So you see a mixture of grasslands, some are shorter, some are taller, and in the horizon you see the forests, and this is the wet alluvial grasslands you would find in the floodplains of Ganga and Brahmaputra at the foothills of the Himalayas, at the region which is popularly called the Terai. And The Bengal Florican has historically been recorded along this entire area. Now, these are coded by colors, and if you look at the black circles, which is the most recent time phase, you will see that the range has shrunk a bit, especially we have lost the southern range of the species. And aside for the ideal grassland habitat, historically they have also been seen at or hunted in other areas, such as in indigo fields, in tea estates where they often laid eggs apparently, in rice fields particularly October, November and in February where they would even eat the flowers or the grains, and mustard fields particularly in January where they would eat the mustard tops. Now this bird, in terms of its feeding, it's called a rather promiscuous feeder, which is 1847 lingo for omnivorous. So it eats a bunch of seeds, grains, grass shoots, berries, grevia, sepida, fruits seem to be a favorite, and in the non-veg department, among insects, grasshoppers seem to be particularly favorite, as well as beetles, the occasional lizard and snakes. And then he gets to the social behavior of the bird, and I could give you a quick summary of what that is, but why would I, since it's a gold of literature, and perhaps Hodgson was drawing out his inner ChatGPT when he wrote, it is neither polygamous nor monogamous, neither migratory nor solitary, which is saying a lot without saying much at all. And then he goes on to say that there is a rigorous separation of the sexes, perhaps more than any other species he is aware of, and the males are invariably and entirely apart from the females after growing up. And this is resonated in some other accounts, such as when Captain MacGregor reported that he had never seen a male and a female close to each other, but often found females very close by, up to 4 being shot by him within 30 yards. And this is repeated in other acts as well. The intercourse is quite transitory, and the rites of the hymen after has been duly performed, the male retires to its company and the female to hers. And there is no evidence from his observations that the male ever participates in any other part of the breeding cycle. And as a queer person who was reading all this literature, I just have to say, very interesting. Moving on. The courtship display is described in 3 broad stages. In the first stage, it is making itself conspicuous, puffing out its neck, then it jumps up in the air, hovers a few feet over the grass, then it dives down and dropping back to the earth. And this entire breeding season lasts from March to June. This is what an egg would look like in dimensions on an average. Most eggs laid between 15th March to April in the eastern part of the range, which is say Assam. However, there's evidence to suggest there would be variability regionally in the timing of when the eggs are laid, which is not surprising because they don't really attempt at a nest. You can scan this QR code to see a copyrighted image of a Bengal Florican nest with its egg. And the simple reason for this variation could be the fact that the eastern part of the range receives rainfalls much earlier, and so they would have to be finished with it before the ground gets submerged. But still, what happens when you lay eggs on the ground, eggs that are nice and big, is they get regularly collected, especially when laid in cultivated areas. And the females, as I said before, were targeted especially because of their fatty meat, and the males on the other hand became easy targets during the breeding season when they do this very extroverted display of courtship. And what that means is that the Bengal Florican, in any way they come, were vulnerable, and that started showing already in the early 1900s when sharp population declines were reported in the literature. And in 1920, seasonal hunting ban was suggested for males between March to August, which is part of the breeding season, and August to September is when the grounds get submerged anyway, so it's difficult to hunt, and for females a complete ban. But it does not look like this found much popularity, so it continued. And about this much is what information from published literature that Ravi Sankaran would have had in the year 1985 when he started his research joining the BNHS project on the Bengal Florican under Dr. Salim Ali as well as Dr. Asad Rahmani and Gautam Narayan, and eventually Dr. J.C. Daniel as well. And this project did surveys across 4 states between the years 85 and 1987, and the areas circled where actually Bengal Floricans were recorded in this period, and the dotted area is the historical distribution. Now you will see that Arunachal Pradesh was not surveyed at that time, but now we know that it's found in Dering Wildlife Sanctuary as well as the grasslands in the Bang Valley. But anyway, the project wanted to estimate the population of the species and understand its distribution, as well as identify what the habitat preferences locally are of the species, as well as what threats they face in different areas and what conservation actions can be taken, and also importantly, what areas can be colonized by these birds again if the areas are restored to whatever the preferred habitat is. And doing the survey at that time is not easy because a lot of these grasslands are quite difficult to access. So sometimes they would be accessed on elephant back, which is a practice still used today. Sometimes they got a little more creative, like bursting firecrackers to flush floricans, which I don't think will get permits anymore for doing. But at the result of the survey, they found 250 to 300 Bengal Floricans in all of this surveyed area across the 4 states, assuming equal sex ratio. And that is important, as we'll eventually find out. Alongside, Ravi Sankaran also started his doctoral research on the behavioral ecology of the Bengal Florican, which he did in Dudhwa National Park. And in 1988, he spent 5 months with his assistant Mr. Mehboob, and they would identify grassland sites, and sitting on the machar like this, they would be observing the birds up to 6 hours a day from little before sunrise for a few hours, then again just before sunset, because that's when the bird is said to be active the most. And the selected grasslands for 1988 was in the Satiana Forest Rest House region, where there is the Chhapra Fata and Nawalkhand Fata, which is areas where there were male Bengal Floricans displaying during the breeding season. This is Chhapra today, and this is Nawalkhand. And this is a view from the Chhapra Macha, similar to what possibly Ravi Sankaran might have been seeing as he looked out onto the grassland and making meticulous notes on every movement that the bird made, which as it turns out was a lot of standing casually, seeing as it was a bustard. But this is what the notes look like early in the season for the first year. And as I assume after 1 year you would have gone back, done some data entry, analysis, preliminary, and see if that shows in the second year, the way the notes are written. And you see a lot of the information has been codified. PCF, meow, male NFI is peacock calling faint. The meow call, a male with a neck fully inflated. So yeah, that's what field work happens over time. And I don't have any deep insights, I just found it very interesting. The second thing that is perhaps more interesting was that Ravi Sankaran quickly realized that the males he was seeing at individual sites for the season was the same male. And for a species that does not have individual markings to identify them, you only get that kind of knowledge when you spend that much time with them. And luckily for us, he documented that for the 1989 season, when in the Chhapra grassland, there was a possible second year male who was molting to its adult plumage, and on this base sketches done by Carl De Silva, he noted the individual markings over time for the males he was observing by scribbles, and I have made a humble attempt at colorizing that. So on 2nd March 1989, Ravi Sankaran goes to the Chhapra grassland and sees this male. It still has a lot of brown in its plumage, and on 3rd, he sees another male there. Now there are 2, but the second one seems to be even younger because it does not have the long feathers on the throat. That's why there are crosses here, and it has a lot more brown. And as the days pass, notice that in both the brown color is reducing and it's reaching its final breeding plumage. And after 6, the second male is not seen anymore. You just have the first male, and by 11th, the brown is only an eyebrow, and by the 14th, there's only a hint of a brown in his beak, and Sankaran realizes that this is the chapra male of the season, and henceforth he does not call it the male at the grassland anymore. Its new name is just chapra male. And after that, he spends 2 years, the better part of 2 years, observing these birds closely. So he goes on to describe the courtship display in much more detail, adding a lot of nuance to the pre-existing knowledge. He also describes other territorial behavior such as neck inflation, where he finds that a lot of the neck inflating behavior may be triggered by other sounds, mostly peacock calls, and the theory that is suggested for that is peacocks are known to sound alarm calls. So if it's making a sound that is not an alarm call, that might be a sign it's safe to make yourself visible and vulnerable by doing the display. That's the theory that was put out. And lastly, he also came to the conclusion that Bengal Floricans have a dispersed lick breeding system. Now, to get into what that means, a traditional lick is one that's pictured here for the greater sage grouse, where in the breeding season the birds aggregate. So these are the males, and in the middle these are the females. So all the males aggregate in a lot of the males aggregate in an area and do the courtship displays, and females basically choose. In this area they maintain the territories and display usually within visual range of each other. When it comes to a dispersed lake like that of a Bengal Florican, they're usually not in visual range of each other. However, there is still aggregation when compared to non-breeding season. And that has implications because lake birds that display lake breeding behavior, they tend to be female heavy. And for the species pictured here, it was found in Utah that they have a 1:1.4:1 sex ratio, so basically 1.4 females for every male, and not the 1:1 ratio that was assumed and has been today assumed as the ratio for Bengal Florican. So this is about all the information we get when we put together Ravi Sankaran's research. Of course, there's much more detail that he has published in multiple papers. And then in the next part, we'll get into what have we done with that information. Do we have questions here? We'll break for 5 minutes at the max, if there are questions. If not, we can move on. Should I move on? Cool. Okay, so very basics. How many Bengal Floricans are there in India? The last time a nationwide survey was done was almost 35 plus years ago, and this was done assuming a 1:1 sex ratio, as I mentioned. However, in the same report, they say that more data is needed before we can conclude anything about the sex ratio of the Bengal Florican. Even more scarily, in a study on the other subspecies, the Blandini subspecies in Cambodia, which we haven't talked about today, there was a study done recently in 2020 that found that it has actually become a male heavy population, and right now there are 3 males there for every female, which is often a sign of a declining population. And the thing is, in India, we do not know which side of the coin it is. We don't know for sure if it's 1:1. We do not know if it is a female heavy, which would be typical for lake breeding birds, and we do not know if it's reached the declining stage, which was a male heavy population. And the thing is, all the surveys that have been done to date have counted males. There has been no attempt to count females for obvious reasons that they are very hard to find. But the thing is, if we are not sure about this, we are really not sure about how many birds there actually are. And the recent thing is, they move. So there have been radio telemetry studies trying to find out where the birds are moving locally. But again, on males, we again do not know what the females are up to. And they might be doing different things than the males are doing, because if we go back to the historic literature, females have been often recorded in ekra, which is elephant grass, which the males rarely go to. Males are known to thrive in a mixture of short and tall grasses, and that complex dynamic system has always been seen as the ideal habitat of the Bengal Florican. But now it is possible that we have overlooked a complete sex within a species because we just assumed they would have the same requirements. But if you go by the history, they probably don't. And they also were up to things like laying eggs in tea estates that would be destroyed during cultivation. They would be, then eggs would be collected, the birds would be shot, and that has been recorded as late as the 1988 when such thing was recorded in the Saidabad tea estate in northern West Bengal. And here we get another line, which is one was shot near Ramshai during the Christmas week of 1918. Christmas week is December, which is a non-breeding season, and I incidentally have worked in Ramshai. It's a part of Dudhwa National Park, and the grass here, at least for the last 12 years, has been tall grass. And also this region was one of the places that was discarded for not having ideal wild Florican habitat in the 1988 surveys. So it's possible that while prioritizing certain areas, we have not paid attention to other areas which could have been potential Bengal Florican habitats. And here we have a pretty extreme example of that. This is the Central State Farm at Kokilavari, which was called a mistake in 1988 and said that it has to be removed. Now the video I showed you at the beginning was shot in Kokilavari last year, and this is 2021. It is now a heaven for Bengal Florican. So I do not have answers for what exactly we know wrong, but clearly we do not know as much about the species as we think we do. And that shows, because even in the protected areas which are supposed to be the ideal wildlife habitats, if mentioned possibly, again from the same report which says there should not be much cause of concern regarding Bengal Floricans at Dudhwa, in the last 5 years not a single one has been seen. So the answer here is not just the creation of protected areas clearly, but perhaps lies in looking at it at a much finer resolution in the management regimes that are being practiced in these areas, which have been shifting. The most widespread way in which the terai grasslands are managed is fire. And the Bengal Florican has a very intricate relationship with the fire, because after the grasslands are burnt, the grasses are small, and that's where the Bengal Floricans can display. If the burning is done too early in the season, if it's finished by December, by the time breeding season rolls around, grasses have grown too much and the Floricans won't choose it for breeding. On the other hand, if burning is done too late, then it directly clashes with the breeding season, which is obviously bad. And the sad thing is, not only have Bengal burning regimes shifted, they have also become unpredictable, because in a lot of protected areas there is no set schedule for burning, which is devastating for species like this. But that's probably because priorities have shifted, or they were different all along, because these grasslands also have a lot of other iconic species like the rhinos. This is a photo from rhinos being relocated to Dudhwa National Park in the 1980s, and there are also water buffaloes in Assam. You have elephants and tiger species that can be flagships for both grassland conservation as well as tourism. While a rare enigmatic species that's rarely seen outside of its breeding season, like the Bengal Florican, is simply either not popular enough or not profitable enough to be a priority. And that's what we have really done with all of the knowledge we have of the species, which in short is not enough. And that is sadly the answer I have for you. And at the same time, I do see that there is merit in going back to historical literature, which we often dismiss in our pursuit of quote-unquote science, because then we tend to dismiss a lot of information that comes with experience of a landscape that simply does not exist anymore. And I could end my talk here, but I won't, because I have one thing that I got deeply invested in towards the end of my work, and the irony is not lost on me as I will now make a quick shift. Because we have to talk about the name. It's called a Bengal Florican, which is a typical straightforward name, but where in Bengal? So let's start at the first picture, if you remember this, by George Edwards, published in 1758. Now, as I mentioned, there's not much to go with, but he does include one paragraph in his description, along with saying it's from in Bengal and it's called church. We get this paragraph where he says that the only source of information he had to go on with in making this painting was a painting that belonged in the collection of Dr. Mead. So after a little digging, Dr. Mead is Richard Mead, who was the doctor to the King of England, King George II, and he had a friend in Bengal named Mr. Cole, who sent him a collection of paintings drawn by Indians, procured in India, drawn by Indians, and then sent off to London. And then he obviously published the copied art in this book, and so naturally I tried to find whether Cole or Mead pop up again anywhere in this book, and he does, in reference to this species, which is the black francolin, which also inhabits the Terai grasslands among other habitats. And here we find one crucial piece of information is that this was also in the same set of paintings, and it was sent to him about 20 years before his death, which means the original art is not from the 1750s, it's from the 1730s, which means the Bengal is a very, very different Bengal, because Bengal in 1733 is an independent state. It's gained a small version of independence from the Mughal rule, and it is 20 years prior to the Battle of Plassey, and Calcutta is still there as a port town, and the Fort Williams come up, but it is nowhere close to the importance that we would naturally associate Calcutta to with Bengal. The capital is at Murshidabad, and one town that's not pictured here but at that point was a hub for both natural history art as well as the biggest market in the region, and had East India Company factory of saltpeter was Patna. And as it turns out, there was a certain Mr. Humphreys Cole who was the chief of the Patna factory between 1732 and 1743. And now this evidence is circumstantial, I know, but in my very broad search online of any coal in this entire region, this is the only person who came up who fit the timeline, the geography, and the name. And as it turns out, he did have involvements in procuring natural history specimens like this rhino that he collected and got sent to London in the 1730s. And this is a poster from London when it was displayed, when people could pay a small amount of money to go and see it. Sadly, we don't know who bought the rhino, so that lead dries up there. But we do know that the rhino was collected from north or east of Patna, and that makes me wonder, is it possible that the Bengal Florican from Mead's art collection was procured by H. Cole in Bihar? Let's look at Bihar in that time. This is a map from the 1700s. Here is a rhino. Zooming in, the rhino is towards the east of Betia. Betia is to the north of Patna. And if you go east of Patna, you go to places, you arrive at places like Darbhanga and Purnia, which is actually the only place from which Bengal Florican eggs were collected until the 1900s by Mr. Shillingford for Alan Octavian Hume. And I was following this lead, but then Mead died. So after his death, his collections were auctioned off in 1755, which by the way included a mummy. And I went through it multiple times, sadly could not find any single mention of art from India at all. So it's possible that either they were lost or someone else was gifted it around the time of his death. And I do not think they were lost, because the painting I showed you at the beginning, which was copied by Edward, it is signed in 1755, which is a year after Mead's death. So I do think the painting survived his death, maybe still around somewhere. But this is where this trail dries up, because Mead's correspondence are available in some archives behind a paywall. So not an option at the moment, but if someone has the means to do it, if you can go through Mead's personal correspondence that are found in some archives in the UK, as well as for sure in the Royal Archives, if you can get your hands on them, very likely will find correspondence with a Mr. Cole, which will shed more light on this species. And I thought I was done, but then the most obvious thing hit me that should have hit me in the very beginning, which is a name. Edwards calls it church, and his only source of information was Mead. And when Hodgson records it, he says it's Church of Hindustan and Daur of Bengal. The word church is a Urdu word that made its way into Hindi and has origins in the Persian word churs, and eventually it becomes church in Hindi, and then it becomes churs and charas as it moves through the Indian subcontinent. Bengal has never called it that. It has been dubbed Daur, which in writing later became Dahor, and in Assam it was Ulu Mura. Ulu is Imperata grasses and Mura is peacock. So the only place that fits this description as well, as it turns out, is Bihar. But wherever that is, the thing is, it's not there anymore. This is the map I showed you before, and in all the places shown here other than in Assam, we have likely lost it. We have lost it in West Bengal, in Bihar, in Bangladesh. So it's only a slightly bit of a Bengal Florican anymore. That's why I've put it in the quotes. And that's it. I do not have a happy ending for you. Of course, there are great conservation actions being taken locally in parts of India, in Nepal and in Cambodia. However, today I want to take this moment to grieve the bird, because we don't do that often enough. And let's be real, even if conservation action grows great and it's in utopian circumstances, it's very unlikely that any one of us in this room will live to see the day that the Terai grasslands are quote unquote restored to their former glory. And that's the story of the fall of a Florican when there aren't grasslands to fall back to. Thank you. Please stand by, because I have to thank a little more. Thank you all again for joining us in person as well as online. Thank you to the archives team for letting me do this work and supporting me and indulging all my ramblings throughout. Someone said that you've already done this 5 times, and I have, because every finding I would have, I'd go and tell them. A lot of thanks to the MSc Wildlife program, because that's how I am here to begin with. And thanks to Dr. Preethade and Sankarshan and Kaushik, who helped me form the idea when I was in the proposal stages, and all the photos you've seen until this point, the modern ones, are by Kaushik, who has been working in Dudhwa landscape for a while now. I have never been there. And yeah, thanks to my mom, who I don't know is attending online, but after today she will tell me, I told you history is interesting. So here's to that. Questions, please. Do we have questions on there?
Hi Nisha.
Hi.
I was just wondering about Sankaran's surveys in the 80s. Was there any light shed on how they decided on the areas that they were going to survey for the first and the final surveys, I guess?
Yeah, so basically they started with the older historical map of the distribution of the species. Then they would go to the forests in the area, look at the maps and see where the grasslands are. They would consult a lot with the officers of the forest department, and even more so the forest guards, who had much better knowledge of the grasslands. And from them they would find out where are the grasslands where in the recent past, say in the last 10 years, grasslands have been, Floricans have been seen in the grasslands, and they would visit those places. They would also visit grasslands in and around protected areas where Floricans have not been seen, to find out can any of them be restored, to get to a stage where Floricans recolonize them on their own. So that was the method that was followed in choosing the spots.
In case there's none, I have another.
Sure.
So I missed the first part of the talk, but my understanding is that the females are really hard to observe, and the males are easier because of the breeding, courtship display and stuff like that. I'm just wondering how much we know about the nesting behavior and the breeding biology of the females in this case. Because,
thank you for asking.
Yeah, because the tea garden,
I have something interesting to say.
Nesting in the tea gardens was super interesting and completely out of left front.
Yeah.
And also just adding on to that, do they breed similarly to, say, the GIB, where it's a very low fecundity throughout their lifetimes, or are they more prolific than the other bustard that I know of?
So they lay 2 eggs a year, and they only lay a third if one of the initial brood is damaged. We don't know if they lay eggs every year, that's an assumption. The other thing is, it's not directly an answer, but I have to mention this since this came up. There's still the 1900s, there was only one egg that had been collected, the one in Purnia. Because whenever they would try to flush female floricans in the breeding season, and they would immediately go and search for a nest there, and they never found a nest where the females were flushing from. Eventually someone figured out that when a female florican that's incubating its eggs, it feels disturbance in the grasslands far, it starts walking. And it walks from something between 75 to 200 yards, and then it flushes. So you will never find the nest where it's flushing from. The way to look for it would be reach the spot where it flushed from, opposite direction, start walking, within 75 to 200 yards you'll find the nest. And then in 1906, this second phase of nest hunting started. Within 5 years there were 90 eggs. And for the largest bag of floricans, male floricans ever hunted in a day is 64, which gives you a sense of what numbers there used to be. And it's said in Assam especially, it was very common to go out in a day's hunting to find 10 birds to shoot, which is not imaginable anymore. Yes, please. Other mic maybe? Thank you.
Am I on?
Kind of. Yes.
Yes. During your research and this deep dive that you've done, as a lay bird watcher, what would be the best place to go see the florican right now?
Kokilavari, for sure. I mean, so last year actually 27 male Bengal Floricans were seen at the Kokilavari farm during the breeding season, and it's a small area, easy to reach. So if you're a birder, that's the easiest place, most accessible place for sure to go to. Because a lot of other places where the bird is found, it will be difficult to get permits and get there.
And given your prior training as a wildlife biologist, how would you go about, what would you think are the most important areas now across the Terai that you would want to look for this bird, especially outside protected areas?
I think seeing as how terribly it's doing inside protected areas, at today's point of time, I would honestly be surprised if it still exists in places outside protected area. That being said, I think there is merit in searching in the non-breeding season, in the taller grasslands, which are much more difficult to search to begin with. But that seems to be the blind spot in all of the searches that have been conducted in the recent past. So yeah, that.
Do we have any more questions? We have time.
Hi Nisha, thanks for the talk. Since a lot of the historical stuff you showed us was talking about how delicious the bird was, did you come across any recipes for the bird?
I wish. I searched. I am not even kidding. I searched. I did not. It's an ongoing conversation I've had at the archives that there should be, for so many game birds, we do not have game bird recipes. And it would be interesting to see what other maybe herbs and fruits and vegetables like tubers that they would be being cooked with. And I would be very interested to find out what's the status of those as well at this point, but not yet. I haven't found, but the search is ongoing.
setup.
Yeah.
Maybe more
Nice.
questions?
I was very much within time. There's a question.
Thanks for your talk. This is a habitat that I'm unfamiliar with, a bird that I've never seen. You mentioned fire being used for management of the grasslands. Is that a post-colonial practice or is that
No. So in a lot of these areas in the Terai, there were tribal communities who would burn the grasslands, and that's not just in India, also in Cambodia where the bird is also found. The grasslands have been historically burned for a long period of time, and sometimes to clear land for cultivation, sometimes to keep predators farther away, because if you have clear land you have better visibility, and it's very possible that there is a historical regime of both fire as well as which has kind of replaced older mega herbivores that would keep the grass heights shorter. And so this is in short not a colonial practice, this precedes that by a lot, and actually after that it has kind of not broken down, but it's not practiced with the same rigor, not by the same people, not in the same places, it's just all shifted.
Hi, Nisha. So even I joined a few minutes late, I didn't see the first few minutes of the slides. And I'm very off the topic. So in one of the previous slides you showed that the historical data is present for this Florican. Something was ranging from 50s to 70s, something from 70s to 80s and then 90s, and the last data was available about this distribution in 2001 I think.
Yeah.
So from then until the conservation started, we did not have any records about it.
So no, regionally, so amateur bird watchers have been going out and seeing the birds, and people who are active, so whether that be forest department people or conservationists and everyone in the field have been seeing the bird, and there have been local population surveys, like it's happened in Manas, it's happened in Kaziranga, but we haven't had a nationwide survey. So we have estimates regionally for some of the areas. Other areas we don't have any estimates, but yeah, there have also been discoveries in places where we didn't know before, like in Deering Wildlife Sanctuary where about I think 20-25 males were seen, and now the Bang Valley we know also have Bengal Floricans. But the thing is, we do not have a nationwide estimate, and we are actually the only country that does not have that, because Nepal has done nationwide surveys, so has Cambodia, Vietnam and Bangladesh have said it's locally extinct. So India is actually the only country that has not done nationwide Bengal Florican surveys in a really long time.
Okay, thanks for the talk, Nisha. It was great. I just have a couple of questions with respect to the photographs that you shared, or the paintings, not the photographs, but the paintings of the Floricans that you shared. I was just wondering whether looking at the grass and the plants that were drawn alongside the Bengal Florican and the Black Florican, would that provide some sort of a clue to deduce where those species were identified first? Is that something that people have or you have explored?
That's a very interesting idea. So the earliest art, so the Edwards art does have some vegetation at the bottom, but I do not know plants well enough to identify, but that is definitely something that can be looked into. In most other paintings, it to my eyes looks like generic grass. It's not very detailed, and in a lot of the British art which is done in the company style, if you remember, the male and female had put, there is no background because they had the style, their style was to not, it's just the bird isolated from everything else against a white background. This actually reminds me of something else. I tried to see if the art style of Edwards could be tracked back to the art style of Patna Kalam, which is Javan stippling. But seeing that it is a copy, I don't think even if one analyzed it, it would be reliable, so I didn't go ahead with that.
Right. I was just curious because in the Bengal Florican, the plant had purple flowers and
Yeah.
the other one had white flowers.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. This question.
Great talk. I just want to ask whether there are any historical or current records of these Bengal Floricans displaying within crop fields.
Yes.
There are?
Yes.
Is it in the same seed farm that you were mentioning?
So it's there in the seed farm. There are historical records of them displaying in rice fields. And if you look at the other, also in, so historically, a lot of the tea estates in this region used to have thatch fields inside, because the thatch would, the tea estate management would have to provide thatch to the laborers to use as thatch for their houses. And there are multiple records of Bengal Floricans displaying in these thatch fields within tea estates. And in the surveys done in 1980s, one of the outcomes is that they say that the thatch fields need to be preserved. But since then it looks like it's kind of become more obsolete, and the tea market overall has also crashed. So every area available now just grows tea. So in some twisted way, Florican also lost its habitat within plantations. And in Cambodia, they live and display almost exclusively in wet rice fields.
That's what I was asking,
Yeah.
because lesser Florican also in
Yes,
Rajasthan
mustard.
is only in
Yeah.
mustard fields.
Yeah, there are records, for sure.
So, Nisha, thinking back to the population in Cambodia, I'm just wondering, like a 3:1 sex ratio is quite wild to have. So, just again, this is not related to archival
Sure.
research, but how do you see that population doing with that highly skewed sex ratio? And in case our population are very disconnected, disparate, tiny population also has a male skewed sex ratio.
Right.
How do you say that has implications for the next 20, 30 years?
So I have to go back into the history, because the Cambodia population was initially it was known only from a few skins from the 1920s and 30s. And then if you know, Cambodia went through a period of intense political turmoil, and there was the Cambodian genocide when obviously this was not a priority. So the Cambodian population of the species was rediscovered after that situation became a little better. So in the late 1980s is when they realized that Cambodia has about 1,000 Bengal Floricans. But then within 3 generations they experienced 80% declines, because there came an influx of intensive agriculture, and what was seasonal rice before now became irrigated rice. So the fields would be flooded throughout the year. So that kind of answers the question a bit, maybe, because if we bring this to the earlier point I was making about looking at habitats beyond what we have looked at before, we also have to look at ways of managing those habitats which are not mechanized, not as intensive as they are now. And so with the Cambodian population, it came down to as low as some 200 birds, and it was estimated they would be all gone by 2023, but they haven't, and now they have a captive rearing program, so we'll see what happens there.
Can you repeat the link between peacock calls and Florican observations? And one more thing. So you mentioned Cambodia, Vietnam have declared it as extinct. What about Myanmar? I mean, it didn't come up.
So
Or maybe I said.
Myanmar, as far as I know, there haven't been reports in the recent history at least. Vietnam may have some birds that move across the border, but there is no known resident population there anymore, which is the same case with Bangladesh, where there is no longer a known resident population. Cambodia does continue to have a resident population of Bengal Floricans. Sorry, what was your first question? The peacock calls.
Myanmar, so you see.
Myanmar in the recent past has no record. And so the calls thing is, so the Bengal Floricans tend to do territorial displays, which begins with inflating the feathers on its neck. So you see the long black feathers, And Ravi Sankaran, in his research, he found that 58% of that display was done just after a call. So a call would most commonly be either a peacock call or a large-billed crow call, and in 78% of the calls, it was a peacock call which triggered this behavior, and followed by a display dive. And the theory with that is, so when you dive, you become vulnerable, and the call, a non-alarm call of a peacock, is a sign that it's safe to make yourself visible. So that is the link that he made between calls triggering the territorial display.
Was this ironically used during hunting in the ranch?
I don't think so, because in hunting it was just a lot of people bidding the place, and the grassland would be cornered from all sides, and the point was to make the Florican flush either way you shoot it while it's in flight, or if you're using a bars, then the bars tracks it and hunts it from above. So I don't think it was used in that way.
I know playback of bird calls is kind of, it's an issue for other bird behavior and all that. But do you think with this knowledge from his research, he could use those calls to make Floricans feel safe enough to display themselves and then use that for a count, maybe?
I don't think just thinking of how that can be used in the way he was just insinuating.
It's a bit too far.
It's a bit. And the other thing with Floricans themselves is they don't make much sounds by themselves. They only make a small chick, kind of like a series of sounds, high-pitched sounds when it displays. Other than that, it's mostly quiet. So we can't make them feel safe by hearing the same species, if that's your next.
Not the same species.
But not the peacock. No, I don't think that would be a smart thing to do. It's possible that it will work, but I don't think that's needed, seeing how peacocks are anyway everywhere. So I don't think we have to add peacock calls anywhere.
I think if we were really desperate.
I think there are things that we can do that will have a more outcome to effort ratio than that.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. And you talked about collection of eggs.
Yes.
Very, very
sure.
easy question, but I can't think of why I'm vegetarian. Maybe me?
No, as a collection.
Okay, yeah, they do look really pretty.
It's not even about pretty, it's just about why do you collect stamps? You like collecting stamps. Why do you collect coins? You like collecting coins. Why do you collect eggs? You like collecting eggs.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, people had skin. The people used to have private skin and egg collections. Like Hume had a massive collection which was later donated to the London Natural History Museum. So this was to augment their own collections primarily. The lesser Florican, however, and this is the documented collection, of course, to eat. Local people would collect eggs to eat, especially as you saw in the tea estates, which has been recorded also. But the lesser Florican, on the other hand, it's been recorded that in country clubs and such, the eggs was a part of the breakfast spread.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's a question about that.
Nice talk, and I was wondering if you came across any cultural aspect or cultural links about this bird, any mentions in poem or songs, folk songs.
I did not. I was hoping for it, but I did not. And I wonder if it's because it wasn't present in local cultures, or there wasn't an effort to see if it was. But the short answer is no, I haven't found any. Not for lack of internet trying.